Welcome to Conversations, Lehman College's series of discussions with major theater and musical figures of our time. Our guest today for the second of a two-part chat is the celebrated sound designer and composer Mark Gray. Welcome back to Conversations, Mark.
Thank you. It is a pleasure. Thank you so much.
That was incredibly beautiful. That was the Enemy Slayer Navajo Oratorio, a text by Navajo poet Laura Tohe. Did I pronounce it?
That's correct, yes.
And the images were by Deborah O'Grady.
That's correct. One of the ideas of the piece, which is very interesting, is initially, I think as I mentioned on the previous show, going down to Phoenix to research this work for Michael Christie in the 60th anniversary of the Phoenix Symphony. The idea of how to infuse a cultural event that really explores what Phoenix is in the Southwest. And Phoenix is actually, it holds the largest Navajo population off reservation. And I immediately found Laura Tohe, and we began discussing ways in which we can look at this Navajo-ness of the area, and but also something that portrays our contemporary life. The Navajo tradition of storytelling it's all oral tradition. So to write a libretto based on a creation story, say, for her was very strange because the stories aren't written in that way. You might see a translation of the Navajo creation mythology, but it's only a translation of one story, of one person's, or maybe a group of a clan itself. But what we decided to do was look at it on a more vast scale that actually infuses this idea of contemporary life, what the Navajo go through today as what they went through as a people migrating south into the Southwest. And so what we decided to do was tell one of the creation stories, the Monster Slayer mythology story, through the eyes of a contemporary protagonist. And he's essentially a Desert War veteran coming back from Iraq or Afghanistan, and coming back into the Southwest, being accepted back into his community, but slowly his demons come back to haunt him from the war. He loses his brother. They enlist together, they go overseas, and he watches his brother killed overseas. And he living with that, returning to the Southwest, kind of boasting like he's back from the service, but over the time of the duration of the peace, his enemies come back to haunt him. And so what's very interesting with the Navajo people is they have a ceremony, a sacred ceremony called the Enemy Way ceremony. And it's meant to cleanse their warriors of the demons they've seen. And so Monster Slayer is one of the hero twins. And he goes essentially out to kill the monsters in the mythology story so the Navajo people can populate. And every time he comes back from one of his slaying of the enemies or of the monsters, he comes back to his family and he's restored. And it's this cycle. And so even today, Iraqi veterans coming back to the Southwest onto the reservation are quite often cleansed in this way. And they're taken in by the community, by the family. And so it's telling the story of a mythology story, but in a way, it's something we can all relate to.
It's serving a contemporary function.
Absolutely, and it's a way in which we can connect as people of this age to a very symbolic set of stories, colorful, metaphoric in ways that if you're not Navajo, it's very hard to understand what they actually mean sometimes.
It's partly in Navajo language.
It
no?
is as well. And so what Laura Tohe was, what she is brilliant at is the ability to write in a very traditional Navajo way with language, but also in a very contemporary Navajo way with language. So the patrons that were at this premiere performance in Phoenix, the normal Phoenix Symphony patrons, say subscriber series, they came, they understood it on one level, but then all of the Navajo that came understood this piece on a totally different level.
That's wonderful.
It was bridge building in a way that culturally it worked in that way, which was the hope of this work, was to be able to bridge that.
How long was the piece?
It's a 70-minute work.
That's a gigantic piece.
Yeah, it's very large. And the orchestra it was about, I believe, 80 players. The chorus was about 150. And then for solo baritone as well. And just recently, actually, 2 months ago, we performed the work in Salt Lake City, where the chorus was 200 singers.
Oh my
and
God.
it was truly outstanding. The size.
That's
Once it starts getting larger and
I was so impressed by the
it's
piece.
thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And Deborah O'Grady, who did the imagery, she traveled essentially the Southwest lands, taking landscape images of our protagonist's path through this entire piece. So there's a narrative, a visual narrative that runs alongside this work. It's very remarkable.
I hope they do it in this area of the country, New York area, sometime soon.
Absolutely. We've been hoping on that. So
I'm wondering, there are many topics we didn't cover last time in the field of sound design. I was wondering, what are the differences working in Broadway sound design as opposed to operatic sound design?
Right. Excellent question, because mostly we hear amplified singers through Broadway and not on the opera stage, as we discussed earlier. But on the opera stage, it's very interesting because it has, I essentially have to go in and create an alternate sonic reality where it feels like it's not amplified, but in fact it's quite amplified. But the way in which you put speakers around the audience, the way you distribute the sound of those body microphones, you can make it feel like it's very natural coming from that principal singer, say, or the chorus, or even the orchestra. And you can do it in a lot of various technological ways, but it's more the craft of understanding what the theater space is and being able to shape with these tools. And so with Broadway, typically, it's a more brute force method of let's get in there and just really pump it to the limit. So you can hear every word, you can really feel the energy of what's coming off the stage.
Sometimes on Broadway, what we hear is too amplified. There's
Absolutely.
a common complaint.
That's right.
It's deafening.
That's right, absolutely. And it's again, with Othello, it's highly sound reinforced text from the actors, from their everything from whispers, because most of the time they're whispering in this production of Othello.
On stage.
Yes, because it's one of these ideas Peter Sellers has, it's an inverted idea where instead of a line of text bridging this climax where you're belting it out as an actor on stage, he has them invert their energy and to go like deep down into something really very quiet. And so I need to bring the microphone into that situation to actually compensate for that, because somebody in, say, 70 rows back is never going to hear somebody saying, and then it was like this.
So you've planted the microphones in the back of their throats.
Absolutely. If I could, I might. But regardless, I think in the case of Othello is because I work so often with creating a smoke and mirrors environment in opera of sound reinforcement that, let's not talk about it as sound reinforcement in opera, is here I can explore it differently. And it's actually I typically focus when dealing with Broadway type of productions in a much more natural way, where I do agree that most Broadway shows are highly amplified and over amplified and unpleasant. Where I can basically last about a half hour, if that, where until my ears are fatigued, and it's a fatiguing thing when you have something so.
What makes people want to do that? I've never understood that.
Well, I think it's projection of the text, and it's projection of trying to get the clarity, and I believe, you know, many. You have a situation where there are many people technically working in the field that don't have, say, the skill set of having had trying to create a very always acoustic environment, you know, where they're just coming in from, let's just rock and roll amplify this, as opposed to like, hey, whoa, let's step back and let's look at this as a craft. And I mean, that's where my music education comes into this, is because studying with, as I mentioned, Alan Strange, working with electroacoustic music, working with technology in acoustic forms of music, and integrating the two, and finding the common ground, is exactly what I'm doing here. I'm just doing it in a way where it's based in presentation for microphones and singers. But at times, you know, in my university experiences, was, you know, we would pull pieces from John Cage, or we would do works like Steve Reich's pendulum music, which is all based in feedback loops.
Right.
And you know, those early works were unpublished works, but they were compiled in Source magazine, which was a Larry Austin.
Now you worked
magazine.
on Source magazine.
I actually, at the time, I was too young to work on Source magazine. It was late '60s into the early '70s. But what Source magazine did was it was a collective for the avant-garde music of the time.
Okay.
And so basically, my experience was a lot of experimentation on the concert hall stage in our music department. They would just say, "Have at it. You have the concert hall for a day. Do whatever you need to do." And we would go bananas and just do all kinds of very strange things. But at the same time, it gave me the experience of knowing my limitations with technology, and where we can go with it and where I can take it. And so now, when I walk onto an opera stage, you know, I know what to expect from this technology that I'm using. And I know how to massage this technology to make it actually have an artistic sound to it and a voice to it, where it's something that lighting designers have been crafting for as long as you can put light on stage, and set designers and costume designers, and the
Everybody but the sound designers.
Right, because it's a very recent addition. But at the same time, again, looking back at the way in which we listen to music differently now, even in the advent between the LP and digital music, is the clarity is just incredible now. And you have surround sound and all of these new adaptations of digital music, which changes our perception in the way we come to expect sometimes concert presentation. Like, for example, in San Francisco at the Opera House, which I've worked at, the Opera House there has it's very unique in that certain places in the hall, it's so impossible to hear the singers over that orchestration.
Right.
The orchestra is just so big of a sound coming out of the pit, and it's all spatial too, so you have to think of, you have orchestra sound coming out of a pit, but you have singers trying to cut through that sound that's going always vertical, and the singer's trying to pierce through that horizontally. So what I do is I actually build up a sound system that pierces the frontal, you know,
Right.
facade of what that sound is, and I just don't overdo it in such a way that it feels like it's amplified.
Dr. Atomic started at the San Francisco Opera.
That's correct.
And then they did extensive revisions and it reopened in New York.
Correct.
At the Met. What kind of sound changes were there between San Francisco and New York?
Well, between San Francisco and New York, we had taken the work to Amsterdam, and we had staged it there with Peter Sellers as well, who did the San Francisco stage direction for that, as well as Chicago
At the Lyric.
Chicago Lyric, and the development of what's very interesting is this idea of shadow is as the characters on stage found their roles developing and their voices climatizing to John's music over time, my design would really focus in on those elements. So it's in a way, as I'm seeing, say, Gerald Finley, who played Oppenheimer, singing his aria right at the end of the first half of the evening. As he shapes it differently, I have to shape my craft around that differently too. And so, as the piece is developing artistically through, say, the orchestras or conductors, or through the principals, and of course of the stage direction, because between San Francisco and the Met, we had two different stage directors. And so their concepts of the way in which they stage these moments are radically different. And so I have to basically do a 180 here and a 180 there in a way that still retains the integrity of the work, because I'm coming with John Adams.
Right.
And in a way of, he's written this work with sound design integral to the part. So my job is to keep that quality level as high as possible.
How would you define sound design? It's an odd question to ask at this point.
It's a great question, because it's very hard for me to define. Sound design, it's amorphic, actually, and it's very similar to, say, the way the word electronic music is used. It used to mean poème électronique from Edgar Varese, or it used to mean Stockhausen, or it used to mean,
right.
And now it means, drum and bass. And it's radically shifted the concept of what it is. And sound design is very similar. It's gone through several manifestations in the name. And in theater, especially, you have a sound designer that does sound effect cues. But also in theater, you have a sound designer who does sound reinforcement design, which is the microphones and all of that. And so it's very hard to describe exactly what it is and what the title should be, because it's very, when you deal with theater, you deal with designers. So in fact, the sound design, it lends its term very easily to other designers, set designer, costume designer,
right.
et cetera, lighting designer. So it fits nicely in that nook with the other designers, but in fact, it's at least the way I treat it, it's more of a kind of artistic adventure.
You sculpt sound.
It's very much sculpting, and like with Dr. Atomic, which we saw at the top of each act, there were soundscapes, and there were mechanical sounds and grinders and things that kind of set up where we are. That I think they were essentially in the dark, and then the soundscape ends and you're into the action of the opera. It was in surround sound, so you could hear a jackhammer coming from that side, or something coming from behind you, or a truck backing up, panning across the middle of the theater itself. But what I do is I take the singer's microphones and I put them through very high quality reverberation. And then I put that reverberation actually into the surround sound speakers. So it actually creates this illusion that the walls are going away.
Do you do that in live time, or?
Yeah, it's all
done on the fly.
All on the fly. And it's based on, every night their performance is different, just a little bit here and there. So I have to know, like, let's say and even with Othello, it's the same exact concept where we have surround sound speakers. And one night, Philip Seymour Hoffman will say that line full force. It's really right there on the edge. And then the next night, it's absolutely a pianissimo. You can barely hear it. And he just radically shifts it around. So I have to follow these things, but also shape the way in which we experience that, and the way in which the audience. So in a way, it's like it's theater magic, where you can
create. It's a
create
little like jazz too.
Absolutely, and it's completely improvisatory, no doubt. And I think that's again where my background in a lot of avant-garde music, especially in college, where they let me experiment, where I could take things to those limits. Now I know I can walk on that ledge and essentially know where I am standing.
Now we're in a new world of sound. Where do you think it's going?
Well, I think certainly right now there are specific manufacturers of loudspeakers. One, for instance, is Meyer Sound, and they're out of Berkeley, California. Their fame is essentially very high quality professional audio loudspeaker systems for live audio, mostly. But what they are exploring is also dynamic loudspeaker systems, which are listening loudspeaker systems. And it uses microphone technology placed on stage, microphones hanging on stage, microphones hanging in the audience. And there's a computer between those microphones and the speakers. And it's doing real-time, very fast calculations of the way in which room ambience change when it changes when audiences come in. Dynamic levels of, say, if it was for chorus on stage, if they're singing at a very low volume level, or if they're singing at a very high volume level, if they're singing even specific notes, you can get in there and you can shape in real time the way in which loudspeakers will interpret, how a microphone would interpret that, but how the loudspeaker represents that on the output, on the last stage of it. So what we have now is actually this transparency, which is starting to happen in sound, where you have no idea it's actually amplified, but it's very amplified. There are a couple Broadway plays right now that are using this system they have. It's called the Constellation system, and it's very unique, but it's one of these kind of listening environments, listening loudspeaker environments, and it is one of the most natural things you have ever heard. You can't pinpoint where the sound is coming from other than its source, but it's coming from a lot of different places all around you. There's speakers all around the audience, but it uses psychoacoustics. It uses the idea of let's change the playing field. You know, you were playing that football game on, say, that high school football field. Now let's put you in Giant Stadium and see how it works.
Oh.
You know what I mean? And all of a sudden, the field is changing, the game is changing, and they've managed to create new technology that's listening to the environment and reacting to that. So it's a dynamic system as opposed to static.
What are you working on now?
Currently, working on, I have two large commissions coming up, one of which is for the violinist Jennifer Coe and the Los Angeles Master Chorale. And so we have a premiere of a new work in March of 2011 at Disney Hall in Los Angeles, and it's with the chamber ensemble as well. And then actually that same month, at the end of that month, I have a Carnegie Hall commission, which is happening with the soprano Jessica Rivera.
Oh, wonderful.
And so that's for ensemble as well, ensemble and soprano. So working on quite a few things, and they're sizable works. They're ranging from 25 to 35 minutes. And again, taking these ideas of almost music anthropology, like what I did with Enemy Slayer, but like the work with Jennifer Coe is based on unification between North and South Korea. So it's a completely different side of the fabric of the world, as well as you know, where I come from. But at the same time, it's the fabric which makes up why we're all here. And it's a story, it's a journey, one man's journey of, and actually a real protagonist. And it's his poetry. Somebody that fled North Korea during the Korean War and spent his entire life trying to reconnect with his North Korean family. And the piece with Jessica Rivera is a work actually looking at ancient Persian mythology stories. And so we're going down a totally different road.
You sure do like the mythology.
Absolutely, I love myth. Well, they make for great theater.
I'm sad to say that we have to stop here. Time has passed very quickly. This has been an outstanding conversation. Let's go out on a performance recording session of Enemy Slayer, a Navajo oratorio by the Phoenix Symphony.
Yes. Thank
You, Mark Gray, and our home and studio audiences for joining us, and we hope to see you again soon for further conversation.
Thank you,
Mark.
Thank you.